at that story. Talks between Wits management and student representatives have deadlocked. The university says it will not be suspending its academic program amid the student protests. Protesters say they will continue until their demands for financial assistance are met. Classes have been disrupted, roads around the university blocked and cars turned away, including that of a doctor on duty. The university has suspended some students. Let's discuss this further with Wits spokesperson Shirona Patel. I'm just double-checking. Ms. Patel, you can hear me, I'm assuming.
I can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for talking to us amid what we know has been a very trying day with protests continuing. We saw some skirmishes, or not, rather skirmishes might be a little bit dramatic, but a situation unfolding with private security and students seemingly confronting each other. It seemed to quieten down after that. And then, unfortunately, we saw members of the media escorted off the premises, or attempting to escort them off the premises. Can we ask you, we've heard the explanation from our reporter Pulele Jones, who's on the ground, saying that that was done to try and preserve safety and security, not only of university property, but of staff members and students. Surely cameras have not provoked students up until this point.
Hi, thanks. So just to respond to that, I think it's for safety and security reasons that and in order to not further inflame the situation, that Wits indicated that media should not be allowed onto campus, and they felt that the presence of cameras could inflame the situation and cause further violence, which is really what we didn't want. And we really, the university, we do have a responsibility to protect staff and students and our property. But also the journalists who would be on campus become, our responsibility. The university does reserve the right to access who comes onto or onto campus or not, and to limit that access. Now, the situation this afternoon was quite volatile in that we had many people from Braamfontein come onto our campus who were not students, who were not staff members, and who broke through two gates, to come onto campus. And we're now in a position where we have to try to get them off the campus. But, some of them pretend, to be students, some of them pretend to be journalists, etc. And so in order to calm the situation and to control it as far as possible, members of the public were not allowed to come in. And we were trying to ask all those trespassers who were on campus to leave. And so in that moment, I think it was during that moment where we said, our security officials said, in order to ensure that we keep the situation as calm and as safe as possible, that for the moment, media won't be allowed onto campus. Should the situation change and things calm down, we'll allow staff, students, and those who have business on campus to be here again.
I'm going to come in there and say that things look relatively calm as they stand at the moment. Students are merely sitting on the steps of the Great Hall. There doesn't seem to be any imminent danger. And the press has a responsibility to bring this developing story, a very important story, as it has such a long history in South Africa. We saw Fees Must Fall. That has played a major role in the development of our higher learning institutions in the country since then. We see those problems still not resolved, and the media have, as I said, a responsibility to share this important news with the country, yet we're being prevented from doing so.
So, yes, on the one hand, I think the media has that responsibility, and definitely to tackle the issues, which are national issues, which, you are right, haven't been resolved in many years. So things like historic debt, there's no way that one institution can absorb issues around historic debt. That would cost us hundreds of millions of rands, which would make us unsustainable. And even bankrupt in a year or two. We really don't want to end up like Eskom. So yes, the media does have a responsibility to report on those such things. But at the same time, the lessons that we did learn from Fees Must Fall is that the minute the media is there and cameras are there, we also see crowds then perform for the cameras. We then see other acts of intimidation and even violence, because people want this news to be shared with the rest of the world. So I think that, we could see it both ways. If you take some of the other universities, take some of our sister universities in Joburg, which don't allow media in, you never get the kind of scenes that you see playing outside the Great Hall, because students know that they just won't get the exposure that they get at Wits.
So we were due to speak to the head of the SRC, Apiwe Nyamana, just before we had spoken to you. We were hoping to try and find out from him what those major concerns were that they feel have yet to be addressed. Because this afternoon, you released a statement in which you tried to clear the air, responding to some of the points from the SRC and from students to say that, which of those points you have, in fact, addressed so far. Can you tell us about the 2 points that you feel very strongly about that you're not willing to address? And one of those is the fact of, scrapping historical debt. We do understand institutions of higher learning must also be viable businesses, so we completely understand that one. Talk to us a little bit more about the 6,000 students on the SRC's list that they want to be registered, and where you're saying that those students, their track record does not speak of students committed to academic progress, and that for that reason you refuse to respond to that demand by registering all of those on that list.
So firstly, we need to question the fact about these 6,000 students. We've never seen such a list that has 6,000 students. Right now, the university has registered 99% of our students. So that's almost the 37,000, we're on 36,700 or so at the moment. And so almost all of our students are already registered. So I'm not sure where that 6,000 number comes from. And we challenge the media, perhaps ask them to produce the list and have a look at this list. In lists where the only list we've seen are lists which have come through to the Wits Hardship Fund. This is where we've put aside 28 million rand to help students in need. That's for them to register and students to get emergency accommodation. So far, that 28 to 30 million rand has helped about 500 students or so. When we pulled the data yesterday and we looked at students who qualify academically, so those who are doing well, those who are passing, those who should be on our campuses because they're passing and they're doing academically well but don't have funding, we're sitting at around 200 or so. In all the lists that were put forward by the SRC, we've had students there who have got historic debt. Some of them amount to 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, which they've accumulated. And they've accumulated this debt over many years. And that's because they haven't passed. They've been failing these years. We've got one incident where a student, an engineering student, has been at Wits for 8 years and hasn't completed a first degree. He's still in his second year. So, and he's now demanding funding. So we can't fund students who failed repeatedly. So these, and many of the students on the list, many of the ones who are disrupting and protesting are actually students who failed repeatedly, who have outstanding debt and who can't register now. We are genuinely committed, and we have been over the past 2 or 3 weeks working with the SRC to help fund these students. So it was the 28 million rand for the Wits Hardship Fund. The SRC raised 6 million rand. They've still got a pot of money left, which they can allocate to students. And we matched that 6 million rand, which we've allocated to students as well. In terms of accommodation, those issues have been sorted. We've got our private service providers on board, and they've agreed to the 45,000 rand cap from NSFAS. So students who are NSFAS can move into private accommodation as we speak.
Sorry, just to pick up on that point, just talk to us about the challenge on that NSFAS cap.
Yeah. So what happened was NSFAS made a policy decision which affected all public universities. And they decided that they would only pay 45,000 rand per annum to accommodate for student accommodation. We objected to that as Wits University, and we put forward a motivation for why that was too little. And it basically went to NSFAS, and they said they could not uphold our objection. We are taking up that with NSFAS through University of South Africa. But what that meant was that students then couldn't afford some of Wits' residences. We then went over to our private service providers, and they agreed to accommodate students at 45,000 per annum. So that issue has been resolved, so that we shouldn't have any homeless people on campus as we speak. The second issue was around beds. So we secured 350 beds from the private sector as emergency accommodation. The SRC demanded another 150. We agreed to that yesterday, and in fact, we've got those 150 beds. But and that was another concession that the university made. So technically, people should not be homeless. They should be speaking to our WCCO in order to get into that system. The sticking point is the historic debt, and that's just something we can't afford if we are to remain sustainable.
Is there any compromise or way of getting around that? Because I know you've made compromises in terms of assisting with student funding. There's 150 million rand in bursaries. Last year, the university spent 1.6 billion in financial aid, scholarships and bursaries. As you said, you've contributed more to the hardship fund. You've also made a concession that students who have 10,000 rand or less of debt, a plan will be made to assist them so that they can still continue with their studies. So in terms of this historic debt, do you see any way forward? And do you see students' point in why they're continuing to protest on this specific sticking point, despite the other concessions made by the university to try and accommodate them?
Last year, can you just repeat that question?
Sorry. I was saying, so students are continuing to protest despite the many concessions from Wits. Do you see why? Have they made it clear to the university why they are continuing to protest despite those concessions?
No, so I think these are national systemic issues, and I think these are the issues that the SRC and others want to bring to the fore. When we looked at the people on the piazza today, some of them were students, but many of them were also from other political groupings, wearing party regalia and things like that. So I think that there are many different kind of issues at play here, not just the issues that the SRC is putting forward. So I think there's politics involved to a certain extent. I think that this is a national conversation that needs to be had. There have been protests at universities around the country, but I think it's when it happens at Wits, people sit up and listen, and that's why it kind of happens here. So I think there is a need for a national conversation. A post fees must fall, where we accommodated, people up to 600,000 and so. Those missing middle are still the missing middle, and we have to continue to fundraise for them. Access to higher education remains an issue. We have to get our TVET systems working. We have to get more students into higher education. So these are large national systemic issues that we need to address. We can't do it as one university, but it's certainly the national conversation that we need to have. And that's definitely where the media has a role to play in raising those substantial issues with the correct stakeholders and role players.
Given that you've just acknowledged, and you acknowledged earlier that the media does have an important role to play, when do you see yourselves allowing the media back onto that campus to continue reporting? Because we know a meeting is underway between the SRC and the Vice-Chancellor currently.
There isn't a meeting underway currently. We're trying to set up a meeting. The only way we're going to solve this issue is through engagement and through talking. No amount of security or damage to property or suspensions are going to solve the problem. It has to be engagement and dialogue, and we're open and committed to that. We're hoping that we could have a meeting as soon as possible, but it's likely to be over the weekend sometime.
So just to double check, because we had received reports from the ground that a meeting was underway and that was why we weren't able to speak to President of the SRC, Aphiwe Nyamana, but you're saying that meeting is not taking place?
No, I've just checked in with our Dean of Students, and he said, and I'm just reading from his WhatsApp right now, he says, we are looking to meet with the students tomorrow. So that's where we're at.
Okay. And have all students at this point been removed from the campus? Is the campus under lockdown? Will private security be remaining there overnight?
Yeah, so what we're doing is trying to ensure that only staff and students and those who need to be on campus are here. And so they're doing a systematic kind of sweep of the university just to find out if there are still any external people, trespassers or perpetrators on the campus. That could take a few hours. We've got hundreds of buildings on our campuses, but that's what they're doing at the moment. Things are still pretty calm as we chat.
All right, thank you very much for talking to us this evening. We'll continue to follow up with you as the situation develops. That was Wits spokesperson Shirona Patel giving us some clarity on the situation at the moment as those protests continue at Wits University.